I had a pen pal from Vietnam. Let's talk about Vietnam. And she was born the same year I was born. And we were before the days of social media. Do you know what is pen pal? We correspond through letters, writing letters, in my days in the 80s and early 90s. When I was in middle school, I had a Vietnamese pen pal. She lives in Australia, and her father was a translator. He speaks French. Vietnam used to be a French colony, right? He speaks Chinese. They are Chinese living in southern Vietnam. He speaks eloquent English. So he was a translator for the old regime backed by American government. So when Saigon fell, the whole family escaped. She was a baby, a few months old. So they wrapped her in a fishing net. People escaped using fishing boats in the 70s because they did not want to live under communist rule. She was a few months old. They wrapped her in a fishing net. They prayed that she would not cry in the middle of the sea or ocean, so that the communists will not come and catch them back and imprison them for escaping. And they landed in Malaysia, in a refugee camp in Malaysia. And after that, Australia took them in. So they live in Australia. That's what I know until the mid-80s. We lose touch. I could not find her on social media. Her name is Linda Lê, L-E, and is a very common name for Cambodians and Vietnamese ladies. There's no way I can locate her on Facebook, social media, LinkedIn, no way. She has a special place in my heart. And they are Vietnamese Chinese. Their grandparents came from China, but it was unfortunate that they settled in Vietnam. If they settle in Malaysia or Singapore, they might not have to escape. And I also came to know a lot of Cambodians, Chinese Cambodians, in one of the church I used to go a long time ago. And they told me Chinese in Cambodia or Cambodia back in those days, the old name, they were minorities. They were considered different. And because of that, they had to pay a higher tax by the old regime before Khmer Rouge. The old regime imposed a very high levy on the Chinese in Cambodia. And because Chinese, majority of them are Buddhists, and some Cambodians are Buddhists, just like Vietnamese. Some Chinese intermarry with Cambodians. But Chinese in Malaysia and Indonesia are less inclined to marry Malays because they are Muslim. If Chinese marries a Malay, the Chinese has to be converted to Islam. People don't want that sometimes. But it's not the case for Buddhists. And it seems that according to my Cambodian friends, the Chinese under the old regime did not retaliate, even though they had to pay a high levy. This is a manifestation of internalized racism and institutionalized racism. Can you see that? The government thinks that Chinese, they are more inclined to be in the commercial sectors, money lenders, shop owners, factory owners. So they assume, the old regime, that Chinese are wealthier, were wealthier. So they impose a high levy on the Chinese in Cambodia before Khmer Rouge, and Chinese abided by this levy. They did not retaliate. It's a reflection of internalized racism. Can you see that? And government imposing a high levy on Chinese is a manifestation of institutionalized racism and personally mediated racism is also manifested in this example scenario. The government assumes that Chinese were wealthier based on the jobs they had, and because of that they treated the Chinese and the local Cambodians differently. Chinese had to pay a much higher taxes than the locals Cambodians, a manifestation of institutionalized racism. Can you see that? And maybe in those societies before Khmer Rouge, everybody was devastated under Khmer Rouge. Everybody was dirt poor. Before Khmer Rouge, the local Cambodians, sometimes they assume that Chinese were better off than them because they were moneylenders, business owners, shop owners. The local Cambodians were mainly peasants. Sometimes they rent their lands from Chinese. So this is another manifestation of personally mediated racism. Can you see that? All three levels of racism are being portrayed in the lives of Chinese Cambodians before the Khmer Rouge regime. Can you see that? Question. See, Chinese were wealthier if you read through this. And the local Khmers were peasants. And they assumed that Chinese cutthroat shortchanged the local Khmers. Because of that, they deserve to pay a much higher levy. It's a manifestation of institutionalized and personally mediated racism. Can you see that? And it's not mentioned in here, but according to my friends, Chinese Cambodians who escaped to the US a long time ago, their parents, their grandparents did not retaliate, a manifestation of personally mediated racism. Can you see that?